We have Dr. Olivé, who's a specialist in sports medicine, and he is a doctor in medicine and surgery by the University of Barcelona, and he has many other diplomas from many other European universities. Since 2003, he is member of the medical committee of the Spanish Olympic Committee, and he's been part of the medical team in the Olympic Games of Sydney, Athens, and Peking, and he was in charge of the medical team in the last two Olympic Games in London and Rio. And he has been also in charge of the medical sports committee. He's also in Catalonia, and he is also a professor at the International University of Catalonia and the University Ramon, and he is also a professor of the EUSES School of the Girona University, and he's also professor at the master's degree of High-Performance Sports of the Spanish Olympic Committee. And he will now speak about the performance of athletes. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I always love to come to Girona, and it reminds me of my summer holidays, because I always spend my summer holidays in this region of Girona. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today. When they called me, I was in shock at first, because usually when I get a call, it's about a medical question, and they asked me to talk about archives. And I thought, well, this will help me also understand better how the archives work in my hospital, because usually the only relationship I have with the archives in my hospital is because I want a file from one of my patients. And when they ask me about specific information, but really and truly I don't know how the archives at my hospital used to work before this anyway. And there are many things that we know about athletes and that we include in their medical files. And I have to say that there have been two main periods when talking about sports medicine and the importance of sports archives. It's before and after the Barcelona Olympic Games, because how many people ask for information from athletes? Well, here we have all these entities that get information from them from the moment they start doing a sport until they become professionals, and they have to explain everything they do, sometimes to avoid sanctions in the case of professional athletes. These athletes need to pass tests, a water test, for example, and if they're not located in 24 hours, for instance, then they are sanctioned. They receive a penalty due to the suspicion of doping. So there is a lot of information that we get from athletes, not just their birthplace or their birth date. So it's like a vacuum cleaner that extracts all this information from athletes. And all this data is in the hands of different entities, and it's not always easy to access this information. And I have been analyzing the situation of Catalonia and of Spain. I've been looking at the background of associations, sports associations in Catalonia, and we have medicine, sports medicine, in a center in Barcelona. That's when we had Dr. Struck and Dr. Galilea doing sports examinations of athletes, because these two doctors, Dr. Sturck and Dr. Galilea, were great sports supporters, and they went to Italy to see what type of research was being done, what type of examination was being done in Italy. In Italy, they had a center where they were controlling sports, and they have, well, their own entities. So these two doctors created their own center, and it's the Catalan Council for Sport. And now we have another center, that is the High Performance Center at Sant Cugat, the CAR. And my colleagues told me that they have had 18,000 athletes in their center, and their files are on paper in many cases. What has happened since then? Well, because in the Olympic Games we all started running to create this center in Sant Cugat, this high sports center, and I went to this high sports center in Sant Cugat, and I told them that I needed some information, first-hand information, so they went to their database to see how many athletes they've had, and to see all the data that's on there. So we have data from 1987, and we are talking about over 17,000 files. Some of the files are on paper, others are digital files. And also I have friends on the Superior Council for Sport in Spain and the Spanish Olympic Committee, and I call them to know how they started gathering data on their athletes, and they started in 1993, and they have files on about 10,000, little less than 10,000 athletes. And the center in Madrid is working with all the athletes that are not in the Sant Cugat Center. And I also talk with the Basketball Spanish Federation, because I played basketball a few years ago, and they told us that since 1993 they have been saving their files, and they have about 1,000 basketball players properly filed and classified. What are the goals, or what were the goals when these databases, these archives were created? The experience in Spain and in Catalonia started with this Permanent Center that I was telling you about, this first sports center that we had. And the main objectives in any case are to gather actual information on high performance sport, because there was no central database. There were some databases from the sports clubs, the main sports clubs, such as the Barcelona Football Club or the Madrid Football Club. And then the goal was to establish how this information, all these documents, would be preserved and used. Another objective was to gather information about the needs of high-performance sport, because we didn't have a list of these needs, a registry of these needs, to see which were the resources required to have high-performance sport in our country. All these objectives were already solid enough to start all these databases. And what are the data that we gathered at the high-performance centers? Firstly, physiological data. There are three main databases at the high-performance centers. Some of the data had to do with the performance of the population, also health data in general, and of sports performance. At the CAR High Performance Center, we have 3 databases. This center, in fact, is made up of 3 entities, 3 important entities that give service to athletes. You know that the Sant Cugat High Performance Center belongs 50-50 to the Catalan government and the central government. They both pay the bill in their own way. And we have then, for example, the health system that has provided the health team, and we also have the education ministry participating in the High Performance Sports Center. And at the CAR, I belong to the Terrassa Health Consortium with around 90,000 people. And we also have different entities that we manage, and all this data is also collected by our High Performance Center. And well, at first we started with the files on paper, as we used to have at the hospital as well. And just recently, we have the files of our high performance athletes whose files are in a larger archive. We also have some services such as psychology services, nutrition services that also use this database. And it just belongs, in this case, this database just belongs to the Sant Cugat High Performance Sports Center. And we also have this ARC program, the R program, where we also have another type of data related to the athletes, for example, their grants, their sports results, and so on and so forth.
This would be like the 3 pillars that support our service. And as you can see, they are not absolutely integrated among themselves. And sometimes they don't even speak the same language. What else can we say? Let's talk about the health data and to see what evolution they've had in this spreadsheet that I took. Well, the conventional history in paper, which presents the sports problems, etc. And another is the evolution of this history on the electronic part, and what is the actual need of this system of health habits, nutritional habits, and the fitness and sport performance, and something else which is the biological passport of a person. This is like a history, a biological history of the responses that appear in blood of metabolical activities of the individual, which are scanned so that at any point there's an altered point. So let me explain. Someone who has an hematocrit about 40 or 42%, and there are some sports people that because of their training, etc., can go over 50. And if you find a sportsman or woman who has 55 or 60, apart from stopping him because he could or she could die of thrombosis, we need to know why. So we analyze the hormone scales throughout their sport life. This is a biological passport which is kept to be accessed at any point in time what it might be necessary. So this would be like the data corollary apart from financial funds, etc., which is not my field. So what was our evolution from the data that we started gathering? We had the same in paper and the same that we had in a hospital. And so we gathered around 5,000 or 6,000 histories, medical histories. They are in a room, which is a huge room, very difficult to access, with a very extraordinary value, because there are documents there that might be used, and there have been doctoral theses made on that, of data from X-rays, biological parameters, blood tests, bone studies, which are there in that room. Now that we're going to remodel the building, we'll have to think where to put it. The same happened with all these documents in our hospital, where to store them so that they aren't lost. I mean, this would be misusing a very important source of information, apart from the High-Performance Center of Madrid, which also has this information about almost 10,000 sports people. So it's very difficult to maintain. This room is very highly, from the privacy we need so that nobody can access it, to how to access it, because every time you need a history, which sometimes with the sports people it's very heavy, because there are all kind of examinations. This is a very, very difficult task and a very expensive task, unless there's the willingness from the public administration to safeguard all this knowledge. I'm not referring to the High-Performance Center, but the information that is stored at the Blume residence in Barcelona or at the Passage Parmanier. Unless there's a public willingness, we won't be able to do it. And then the difficulty of how to make use of this knowledge. And when I made my doctoral thesis, I used to go, it was about early electrosis in sports, and I had to go with a package of histories because nobody wanted them. And then I used to go there on Saturday, and then I was drawing lines and quadrants, etc. Now I go to the hospital, I just have the lines in a computer, and then I have the risk parameters. So this, unless we digitize this information, it will be very difficult to reach to the information. And the other big problem, this cannot be shared completely with other people who are studying sports. So as of today, it's very easy to make a photograph, to have a JPEG, but when we have to do this, the first difficulty is to locate the history, and then to make it easier for a colleague to see this document that we have. The other important issue is the evolution on the history of the electronic history. This has led to some problems. Why? It was very good because it has made and reduced the space, because now in a computer we can access this information, and it can be accessed very easily with another specialist, for instance, in a hospital or third-level hospital, because of a problem we might have with our sports people. But this difficulty, we understand that we need to adapt to what the Generalitat de Catalunya has specified as global history, medical history, specified by the Generalitat of Catalonia. So many parameters that we use in sports people don't have an equivalent on the OCR that the Generalitat de Catalunya has. So it means that from time to time you have to go with people who codify. So the Generalitat is interested in payments for each patient, right? But in our case, we want to clarify the diagnosis of our patient. So it's not so difficult to share this kind of information. And this would be the evolution we are having. And once we have transferred all the information to the computer, so when we go abroad, if I have a problem in Korea, I can access to this shared history and I can see which are the antecedents for, or if I go to the Olympic Games, I can access with some coordinates, I can access the history they have in Madrid about these problems a sportsman or woman might have. And sometimes we don't know about their medical background. So now I'm going to tell you about the adventure we had when collecting the 35,000 that we had at our database from 1987. When I took this database, I went with a colleague and friend who's called Manel Vela, who knows very much about Excel spreadsheets. Well, now give me a hand, lend me a hand, because I want to prepare this during the summer, and let's see if we can. Well, we have to talk about that. So he offered to help, etc. So out of these 35,000, we discarded 9,000 because there was incomplete data or because of other problems. So we were left with services that the institution had provided. And this was like around 28,000 activities generated by these athletes. But we said, well, this doesn't match. I mean, people are repeating. How many athletes have we had? And the reality is that after all this selection of data, we have around 17,350 athletes who have been at the CAR from 1987 to July this year. And I want to mention him because he has spent many hours working on this and asking this spreadsheet. And if I ask how many athletes have only come here for once, and then you have a series of numbers of people, so this is like their intimate relationship he has with this spreadsheet that I don't have. Another important data that we have, well, another important thing is that what type of sports people we have at the high-performance centers. Most of them are Olympic sports. It's not about any kind of disdain towards other sport or other athletes, but we think that high-performance sports is it's an activity for the interest of the state, because this serves them to participate. I mean, having Olympic medals is related to the quality of life of a country. So that's one of the reasons why we have Olympic athletes who will compete every 4 years in our elements. And most of them are for individual sports. We don't have much collective sports. We have are especially like water sports, synchronized swimming and water polo, because, well, we are popular in this. And then we have handball, hockey, which are a very privileged sport in the Valles area. But mainly our athletes belong to individual sports or practice individual sports. Just to, summarize a little bit, and then I will be open to questions. I've just concentrated data for Olympic periods from Athens, the ones we had in Beijing, the ones in London, and in Sydney. So more or less the number has been reduced, and now we have around 17 medals and around 300 athletes that take part in the Olympic Games. One of the first things that we understand when we see this evolution, cyclic evolution, is the great role of women. from some years ago, women's sports is the one that gives a higher performance. The women are going up in a very accelerated way in terms of performance. That's why a lot of money is being invested in female sports, because with a lower investment they obtain much more efficacious results than when we invest in men. Especially from 2008, we see this crossing of results in favor of women, and as far as the results in the Olympic world. Also, the crisis that affected everyone and some federations, well, the establishment has reduced their salary by 70%, and they have just laid off a lot of people because of the economic recession, so investments are very low. And there's an element of dropping in these investments, and as women require a lower investment, we have even been growing despite this lack of investment, because we are kind of maintaining results. So when we see the types of sport, we also need to see that if we draw a line and we check the dynamics, we see that individual sports have been maintained despite the economic recession, because there's a lot of personal effort, and we don't see the investment as much as with collective sports, whereas collective sport decreases. There's an economic loss. So I think that one of the reasons, well, they say they are abandoning this, going out of this crisis, but if we compare the services we have had, the number of services has been increased regularly. High performance sports requires the involvement of different resources from science in order to give a high profitability to the investment that is made, from engineers to mathematicians or computer scientists. We need a great differentiation in order to match all this data. Also, the female thing, the growth in respect to demands of activity and services on the part of women has suffered also an increase, and that matches the good results they are obtaining. So which are the predominant sports? So on the one hand, run and track, and then water sports and water polo, especially because we take care of the national team, female and men's national team, and there's also a tradition of the great Catalan teams. And then also hockey, that as you can see is repeated on grass hockey, because it's also an element of investment at home. The last slide I'm going to show you, this is something that, well, we have just checked for the ones who have asking services from the center to reach the Olympics. Some of them need 17 years in order to obtain an Olympic result and participate. So high performance sport is not cheap as far as investment and personal and financial investment. We calculate that a great athlete needs to work at least for 7 or 8 years in order to obtain a good performance in the Olympic world. And this is the one that when we specify the periods of time. And after all of this, all of this I've told you, we have reached a series of reflection, not conclusions. Why? The first one is, do we design data sheets? No. Database? No. Because we include things that have no interest, and the ones that are really of interest, when we go and check, we realize that some data are missing. So when we create an archive, or when we want to create a database, we should consult with you professionals to see what we need. and with a computer scientist nearby, because this is important for us. The second important thing, compatibility, trying to find a language that allows, with very specific codes, to search, to carry out searches that are quick and fast, because sometimes in order to make a search, it's very time consuming. Accessibility, well, there shouldn't be a database from a specific center, but from the cloud, so that it can be accessed from anywhere. Of course, but we need to safeguard the privacy of people and their personal data, because we are in front of data, health data, which are very sensitive to each person. But accessibility. And the other important thing is that when we design it, to understand why do we ask for it, because sometimes we have such an amount of data which are kind of useless and that they are there. It would be much easier if, because moving a 30,000 database, it might take a very long time to make searches. So you need to make it appropriate. And well, I stop here, and I'm at your disposal if you need any clarification of anything I have mentioned.